Thank you very much. So our next, again, shifting gears, which is the whole idea of this entire evening, we have a mammologist for you. In fact, she is the curator of mammals here at the museum, and she specializes in small mammals and bats. And she's going to tell you about a problem called white nose syndrome in bats that's been a problem for at least like 6 years. That's a really serious syndrome, as they called it, in bats. Please welcome Lisa Gatens.
Thank you. In February of 2006, a caver in a cave near Albany, excuse me? You need to embed a mic in an ice cream cone, and then it'll work. Or a beer, that'd be even better. So in February of 2006, a caver in a cave near Albany, New York, photographed some hibernating bats with a strange white growth on their muzzle, and he also noted some dead bats on the cave floor. The following winter, in January of 2007, reports started coming into local biologists in eastern New York of bats flying around on snow-covered cold winter days, which is atypical if you don't know that, and reports of many, and I'm talking thousands, of dead bats on cave floors. And so white nose syndrome was first documented. That white growth that Caver first documented in 2006 in his pictures was the result of a newly described species of fungus called Geomyces destructans. It is what is killing bats. It's a pretty insidious thing, and I'll get to that in just a second. It's a cold-loving fungus, and the conditions of hibernation are kind of the perfect storm for this fungus to have caused all the problems that it has. The temperature of bats during hibernation drops to nearly ambient temperature, and they cluster very tightly during hibernation. And so it's just perfect conditions for rapid spread of this disease, and that's exactly what's happened. The way it kills bats is the fungus invades the non-furred parts of the skin, so primarily the damage is done on the wings. And it doesn't just invade the skin, it actually invades and replaces skin tissue with fungal hyphae. And this causes tremendous disruption in homeostasis. The wings play a huge role in maintaining homeostasis during hibernation. And the result is tremendous tissue necrosis, so loss of the wing membrane, severe dehydration, and complete loss of stored body fat. And a bat without body fat during hibernation is a dead bat. And in fact, all of the bats that have been necropsied that have died from white nose syndrome had 0 fat stores halfway through hibernation. So they essentially starved to death, which is why they were seen flying around, why they are seen flying around in the middle of winter. They wake up from hibernation, something is causing them to arouse from torpor. They go out into the cold, and bats don't do cold. It's not something that they're familiar with. And there are no insects to eat, and they die. The mortality rate in caves that have been affected by white nose is 80 to 100%. This is particularly problematic because bats are very long-lived, and very, very long-lived. I think you'll be surprised. And they have tremendous roost affinity. They return to the same summer roosts every year. They use multiple roosts in the summer, and they return to the exact same cave every winter to hibernate. So if a particular bat survives one winter of exposure to white nose syndrome, they're going to return to the same infected cave in the following winter and face exposure again. So from that first site in eastern New York where white nose syndrome was first documented, it has spread throughout the east, throughout the Appalachians. It is now known, and north into Canada and west into the Midwest. It's now known from more than 200 sites in 20 states and 4 Canadian provinces, and has killed more than 5 million bats. As a result of this, as a direct result of white nose syndrome, the effect on bat populations, there are currently 2 species of bats under consideration for listing under the Endangered Species Act. And just this week, we got an email asking for comments for the consideration of 3 additional bat species to be listed. In eastern New York at Ground Zero, near where white nose was first documented, there is an 80% reduction in bat populations there, and some locations have seen complete extinctions, local extinctions. So why should you care? Well, it's a tremendous change in the landscape, for one thing. So if an estimated 5 million bats have died from white nose syndrome, that means there are 3,500 tons fewer insects being consumed every year. 3,500 tons. This has been described as the worst ecological disaster of its kind. And in a study published recently in Science, the annual economic contribution of bats, of insect-eating bats, to this country is more than $22 billion annually, just by bats doing what they do. This is, it's like the worst thing that can happen to, to bats and people who work with bats. It's a horribly insidious thing, and we don't see the end to it. So, there you go.
Thank you,
Dale,
Lisa.
sure you-
Yes, excellent. Thank you. 22. Did you say 22? The value about 22 billion. That's the value we place on having to swat that many mosquitoes that you just that aren't getting eaten. To pay people to do that, perhaps. So, with that uplifting talk about dying current species, what are you doing?